In this video, I'm going to be talking about smart objects within Photoshop. I'm going to be going over the 5 primary uses for smart objects as a photographer, and I'm also going to be showing you how to create and use them. So first off, what are smart objects? If you recall back to the layers chapter, they are one of the 3 types of layers that you might use as a photographer. And the special thing about smart objects is that they are essentially like boxes or containers within a layer. So this means that that layer can hold a bunch of additional information within Photoshop. I know that sounds like a lot, but let's go ahead and start with how to create one. So if we load up Photoshop here, we got this image taken in Palenque. If I want to convert it to a smart object, I just right click and go convert to smart object. Now, as you can see, it has this little icon here, which means it's a smart object layer. If I want to go ahead and convert this back to a pixel layer, I right click and hit rasterize layer. And now it is no longer a smart object. So let's go ahead and talk about the first primary use for a smart object within Photoshop, and that is for filters. Now, there's going to be a whole different chapter on filters in this course, but I'm going to go ahead and show you how this can benefit your filter experience when we do get to that chapter. All right, so first off, we got this image of Palenque pulled up here, and we're going to go ahead and copy this layer here and make a filter on this layer. Let's go ahead and do a high pass filter, which is essentially like a clarity filter. So I'm going to explain this all in another chapter, but let's go ahead and hit that to 3.4 and make this a soft light overlay. So now we have a clarity filter over the top of this. The only drawback with a normal filter is now I can't go through and edit that level of clarity in the future because it is already baked into this layer here. I can fix this by doing this with a smart object. So let's go ahead and undo that and start from the beginning. Except this time on the filter layer, I'm going to convert it to a smart object. Let's go back and do the exact same thing. High pass, 3.4, okay. Soft light, and at first glance it looks exactly the same, except now we have this fancy smart filter here where if I click on this high pass button, I can now go through and adjust just how much clarity is in this image here. It's no longer baked into that filter layer. So this is one of the benefits of using a smart filter or a smart object on a filter layer instead of just doing a filter layer. This exact same technique can be applied to any of the other filters up here in Photoshop. The second way that you might use a smart object within Photoshop is with transformations. So let's hop over to this image here and let me show you what I mean. If I were to do a basic transformation on this layer, say I hit Control T and hit the warp button here, can now go through and warp this image here. Maybe I want to increase the size of this little pool right here and make it a bit bigger and more dramatic. Let's say we want it like that, for example. If I were to hit OK, now it's going to bake that transformation into that pixel layer. Now we can't go back in the future and edit that transformation if we need to. Say we were to hit Control T now and click the warp button, those warps are already in there and we can't go back and undo those if we need to. Now, if we wanted to go through and do this the smart object way, we can simply convert this layer to a smart object, go in and make those transformations. So we do this, for example, hit OK. Now, if I go back and hit Control T and warp and bring up that menu again, like so, we can see that those transformations I already made can be readjusted. So if I hit undo, I can now go ahead and undo that layer there. So that's a great reason to use transformations in conjunction with smart objects. This also leads me to the third reason that you might use a smart object within Photoshop. So say for example, with this image, I had a ton of edits here. We'll go up to the original file right here. So as you can see, there are a massive amount of layers that I did. And say I didn't make those warp adjustments at the beginning of the image, but I want to make them now. And I want to be able to do that while still being able to edit any of these layers if I need to. So one thing I could do is select all of these layers here and convert all of them into a single smart object. Now you'll notice that there's already a smart object within here. So if I right click and hit convert to smart object, it's gonna put all of those layers into one smart object, even if there's already smart objects. So yes, I am saying that you can put a smart object within a smart object if you need to use it tactfully. All right, so now you can see all of those layers are put into one smart object here. And now I could go through and do a warp on this object here. Say we go like that, for example, hit OK. And now that warp can be edited later on if I need to. It also retains all of the layers below that. Let me show you. So now if I double click on this smart object here, and as you can see, that's gonna open another tab in Photoshop here where all those original layers can be edited. So if I were to go through and edit one of these layers here, that would be retained in the original image here, even with the warp over the top of it. So this is massively beneficial if you want to make warps after you've already gone and done all of your edits within Photoshop. Let's go ahead and hop to the fourth reason that you might use a smart object within Photoshop, which is to retain the raw information. So to do this, we're gonna go ahead and start in Lightroom. And if you remember in my preliminary Lightroom edits chapter, you can see there's a bunch of adjustments that I like to do in Lightroom before I take it to Photoshop. As a quick refresher, I like to adjust the color balance, I like to adjust the tone, and I also like to go down and do lens corrections and noise reduction if necessary. So one thing you can do is you can open this image as a smart object within Photoshop. Now what this is gonna do is it's gonna allow me to go and make those raw edits within Photoshop. Let me show you. So as you can see, this has been opened as a smart object. And now if I go ahead and double click on this smart object icon here, it's gonna open something called Camera Raw, which is essentially the exact same thing as Lightroom, except now it's within Photoshop and I can make those edits within a certain layer. So now I could go back and change some of these tone edits or these color balance edits if I really needed to. Some photographers like to do this so that if they get down the line and they're editing an image, they can go back and make those raw adjustments if necessary. Personally, I rarely do this because it does come with a few drawbacks that I don't find good. So for example, with smart objects, I can't go through and do healing edits on it. So as you can see, this smart object must be rasterized, aka converted to a pixel layer. So if I were to do that, it would completely defeat the point of importing it as a smart object, which means you have to do all of your healing edits within Lightroom. And as we know, Lightroom doesn't have the best healing tools. It doesn't have the content aware fill tool. So if you're planning on doing big edits with your healing, it's not the greatest idea to import as a smart object. Another drawback is you can't do a focus stack with smart objects. And in my workflow, I end up doing a lot of focus stacks, so I just don't import them as smart objects. I do all my raw adjustments in Lightroom beforehand. With that being said, there is one reason that sometimes I do import to Lightroom as a smart object. And this brings me to the fifth reason, which is for dual raw exposure processes, which is a bit of a mouthful, but let me show you what I mean. So this image right here is a raw object within Photoshop. If I go ahead and click Control C and Control V, I can now create a copy of this raw adjustment. And now I have two. I do want to point out that you can't duplicate a layer if you're going to use this method. If you duplicate a smart object, it's going to link these two smart objects together. Therefore, any raw adjustments I make in this smart object will also affect this smart object. We want to be able to make raw adjustments to this smart object that are different from this one. So that's why I use the Control C, Control V copy method. So let me show you what I mean here by a raw dual adjustment. So let's go ahead and open up this one right here. So say we want the sky to have a very warm temperature in it. And as I talked about before, you can pull out much more information in this section up here if you're doing a raw adjustment. So we're gonna make the sky very warm up here and hit OK. Now for this bottom layer, I want to make the ocean very blue. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a mask here on this top layer and mask out the ocean here. So let's go ahead and paint this ocean out. So as you can see on this mask here, now this raw adjustment is only affecting the sky. Now let's go ahead and edit this raw adjustment, but pull out that blue in the ocean even more and hit OK. So now we have an extra blue ocean and an extra orange ocean that could only be possible because we're working directly with the raw files here. So that is how I use smart objects within Photoshop. Now, those last two examples are a bit more niche and are really up to your photography workflow choice, but I wanted to go ahead and show them to you just in case that's something you want to do. Let's go ahead and hop into the next video.